All right, hopefully you have now copy pasted the contents of all these libraries into the library list.json file. So now we are going to import that list of libraries into our library reducer, and instead of returning this empty array right here, we will return that list of data or list of libraries that we just added. So at the top of my library reducer file, I will import we'll call it just simply data from library list.json. And take special note, because it is a file extension with .json instead of JS, I have to specify it here. The packager, Webpack, that we're using, kind of behind the scenes here, behind the scenes of React Native, by default, it will assume that all your files end with .js. So if I want to use .json or like a different file extension, I have to be very explicit about it. All right, so now this data variable right here, this import, should be an array of objects, where again, each object represents a single library. So now inside of my reducer, I'm going to say that whenever this reducer runs, whenever this thing runs, I will always return my list of libraries. So now my expectation is that because I hooked up my library reducer to the library's piece of state, if I were to ever call console.log store.getState, I should get back something that looks like libraries, that is an array with ID of 1, title of Webpack, description of, so on, whatever, and then all the other libraries that are in here as well, okay? Because this reducer is not looking at any action, right? It's not like looking at the different actions, any instruction or something like that. It is always going to return the list of data. So as many actions as we might dispatch, remember actions is how we update the data that is inside of our reducers. No matter how many actions we dispatch, we will always have this static list of data coming back from this reducer. All right, so I'm going to clean up the console log here just because I don't really want to see it. So this is our list of data. Hey, we've got something, right? Hooray. Or in theory we do, I guess. I mean, we haven't really used it just yet. But maybe that'd be a great next step here. Maybe we should go back to the React side of things and figure out how to now take this data that we're producing and show it inside of our application. I think that'd be a great next step here. So let's make a new component that will be responsible for just rendering this list of libraries to the user, since now in theory we do have some data to show to the user. Okay. So because I want to show a list of libraries to the user, I'm going to make a new component inside of my components directory called librarylist.js. So librarylist.js right here, the purpose of it is going to be to just render that list of libraries to the user. So let's throw in our usual boilerplate. I will import React and component. I am going to make this a class-based component. So I say class library list extends component. I will define my render method, not return method. And for right now, I'm just going to place just a return statement in there. We'll talk about why in just a moment. And at the bottom, we will export default library list. Okay, so boom, here's our boilerplate. Good place to start. Now, this component right here, library list, has a very interesting requirement. We need to somehow, inside this component, reach into our Redux state and pull out that list of libraries, right? Like we need to get at that list of libraries somehow. Now you might think to yourself, hey Steven, no problem. Let's just import data from library list, JSON, whatever it was, and then we can just render everything inside this component and boom, we're happy. Okay, yeah, that is how we could do things if we were not using Redux. But when we're using Redux inside of our application, things change a little bit. And we now have a very discrete, very well-formed, very documentable and reproducible method for pulling data out of our state object, remember, out of our Redux store, and showing it inside of a component. So this method that I'm about to show you, that we're going to cover inside this section, or maybe it'll bleed over to the next one a little bit, is going to be the way, the one and only way in which we reach into our Redux state and access some amount of data. All right, so let's at least get started on it in this section and then maybe continue it in the next one. Okay, so here's kind of a diagram of what our application looks like right now. I'm going to change the name of this to what it really is, libraries, and that one's fine. Okay, so this is kind of what our application looks like right now. At the very top, we've got our provider tag, and as we've learned, that wraps our store, right? And okay, that was an awful typo. Libraries. Okay, still, all right, I need to just stop trying to, there, good enough, whatever. So inside of our store, we have just one reducer right now. Technically, we don't really have this selected library ID just yet, but this eventually will be the piece of state that reflects what the selected library is. But for right now, we just really want to focus on this libraries piece of state. So we said that the libraries piece of state is the list of libraries, right? Is what is being produced by that reducer. So the provider tag is showing, or is like basically inside the app component, right? And our app component will very shortly be displaying the library list. Like we haven't rendered it inside there just yet, but we will very shortly. So what we have to do, what we need to figure out is how to get this library's piece of data, this library's piece of state from up here and push it down into our library list. Okay, that is the goal. We want to get something from our store down into this child component right here. We need to forge a connection between the store and the library list. So how might we do that? To get some amount of data and push it into the library list from our store, we are going to use what is called a connect helper. The connect helper right here is a feature of that React Redux library. And remember, React Redux, that library, we discussed it, it is the glue between Redux and React. So it kind of makes sense that we are using that to get access to some piece of Redux data from a React component. Connect is a tool that is used explicitly to connect a component to the Redux store. So by wrapping, so to speak, the library list with this component, or this connect function, this connect helper right here, we now have the ability to reach back up to the provider up here, to the store, and say, hey, I want a piece of state. I want access to that libraries piece of state. So that's the idea here. We are going to use the connect helper to give the library list some very discrete access to our application state up top. I know this might be a little bit of a long section, but let's add a little bit of the code in just to get started with this thing, and then we can continue in the next section. So to add a connect helper to any single component inside of our project, I will first import the connect helper at the top. So we'll import connect from the React Redux library. Now here's the weird part about connect. So connect, again, we use it to get access to our Redux state. The weird part about it is the syntax that we use for implementing it. So we're going to toss in some code here, and then we'll talk about exactly what it's doing. I'm going to go down to the bottom of my file, to my export default statement, and here's the weird syntax. I'm going to say connect, I'm going to add a set of parentheses, and I'm going to add another set of parentheses around library list. So I've got connect with one set of parentheses, and then another set around library list. So this is not a mistake here, this is very much on purpose. So here's what the syntax does. It calls the function connect, because connect is a function. When connect is called, it returns another function. So you can imagine that this immediately gets invoked and gets turned into a function. We then immediately call that return function with the library list. Okay, so you can kind of think of this as a two-step process. First, connect gets called, it returns a function, we then immediately call that function with the library list. Two-step process. So why in the world, right? Why in the world did the library author choose to make a method signature like this? Why didn't they not just do something like connect library list and then whatever other arguments we might want to have in here? Fantastic question. Great question. This goes back to my general guidance on Redux. It is a lot of fancy stuff that otherwise obfuscates concepts that are, maybe not the worst thing in the world, not the scariest thing. Maybe some of these concepts are not so difficult to understand. It is sometimes the implementation or the syntax or the crazy terminology that Redux uses that makes it kind of confusing. Anyways, Let's continue in the next section and figure out exactly how to use this connect helper to get access to the piece of state that we want.